All right. Well, welcome to another version of our LinkedIn lunch break. Today we're going to be covering the Apple iOS kind of updates and provide a little insights on what impact that's going to have on marketing. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Jay Litke. If you want to just give a little background yourself and your experience in advertising.
Sure. Yep, this is Jake. I am the CEO of MediaJel. We are a programmatic digital advertising platform that was built for the cannabis industry. And I've been working in the advertising technology space for a couple decades now, and I've seen, many cycles of these platforms change over time, including, the launch of the iPhone, which, now we're on version 14. And we'll talk about, how that's going to change things.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, thank you for joining me today, Jake, and we'll just hop right into it. So, data and privacy protections have been going on, and they've been a hot topic for years now. This Apple iOS update was inevitable by Apple. The goal is to give users more transparent choices to protect their privacy and information. So the iOS 14 update, most notable changes are to its privacy and data sharing policies, also known as Apple's App Tracking Transparency Framework, ATTF. So this update applies to all apps within the Apple App Store, including Facebook-owned apps like Messenger, Instagram, and WhatsApp. So this is already having a major impact on businesses. And Jake, I want to talk to you about how this impact has made an impact on marketers. So can you tell us, what exactly is changing with the Apple iOS 14 update that has marketers worried?
Yeah. So there's a lot of details to this and different dimensions. So I'm going to try not to get too far down in the weeds in one part of it, but broadly speaking, it's important to understand the distinction between web traffic and app traffic, right? So the changes that Apple is making are happening in two different categories. One is you have the fact that, Safari and Firefox now block third-party cookies, which affects web traffic and the ability to track users from a advertising technology perspective. So that affects analytics, tracking, remarketing solutions that don't live on the domain. Now, first-party cookies still function, right? So if you're a publisher and you're setting a cookie on your domain, you're still allowed to, understand who your users are, assuming you're following the appropriate cookie consent rules. And then, Chrome will get rid of third-party cookies sometime next year, right? So that's the web portion, and that affects your ability to leave a marker on a browser and kind of track what people are doing. Now, on the application side of things, you've got, mobile advertiser IDs or IDFAs that sit on the device. And that is what most app developers have been using because it's a semi-persistent value. And you can use that to tie that information together. And technically, Apple's not taking that away. They're just making it very, very clear to consumers now that that information is being used. And they're doing it in a way that goes beyond that initial, you've downloaded an application, you check the box, and then you start using the app, and you don't realize that forever on that app is tracking your location and tracking your device ID. So technically, there's not they haven't taken anything away other than they're just making it very obvious to consumers, right? So I'll start there, and we can move on from that.
Okay. Thank you for that insight. And Facebook is really the kind of talk of the town when it comes to this limitation. And we hear that Facebook is one of the hardest hit platforms because of this update. What impact will this have on ads served on Google and other advertising networks?
Yeah. So most advertisers that are doing advertising on Facebook are using the Facebook remarketing pixel. on their site or within an advertising SDK on the phone. And by taking that away, it does a number of things. Facebook is already shortening down their default attribution window from 28 days to 7 days, right? Because if you don't have a persistent identifier, the signals get very weak, right? So they've sort of taken that proactive approach to change their attribution windows. And they've also now limited the number of parameters that you can track, right? So they've gone down to, I think it's 8 or 9, I forget the exact number, of whether it is an add to cart or it's a conversion event. They've also sort of reduced the scope of things that you can do there. Now, another important thing to understand is that when you're in the Facebook application, Facebook has not lost any of its ability to know who you are, because you're a registered user, you're logging in with your email address or your phone number. They know who you are. And if you're inside of the Facebook ecosystem directly, you won't be impacted, right? The question then becomes, if you're a third-party application and you are trying to get app installs, say through advertising on Facebook, you don't get the same linkage anymore, because normally app developers would get that device ID, they could send that back to Facebook and say, I want to figure out whether this new app install is the same person I was advertising to on Facebook. And unless you've got user registration data, then you're not going to be able to do that the same way. And that overall is where things are going to be moving. And they're kind of going in two different directions, right? You look at what's called consent-based marketing, where now publishers are saying, please give me your email address or your phone number so that we can serve you better. And really what they want is they need to be able to identify the individual so that they can have higher value for their advertising dollars that they're receiving. Whereas Google is going more with with Flock, which is basically not a consent-based system, but more let's look at what this user has been searching for and doing over the last, say, 7 to 14 days, and putting them into a cohort. So they're two very different directions that people are taking that.
Okay, now that's wonderful insight. And how will this impact Google remarketing audiences specifically?
Yeah, so Google, if we're looking at Google is going to be, like I said, going more towards Flock, which sits inside of their browser. But in terms of remarketing, if you're inside of Chrome still allows third-party pixels is one thing. But you just aren't going to have the same ability unless you have some sort of consent and you're using something like many companies are moving towards a hashed email address, right? And again, this is getting more towards the individual and an individual that has given consent. And that's sort of where people are moving towards. What has been happening historically is more just around the device. And so and using the device ID was considered, it's kind of a gray area, but lots of people consider that to be non-PII because you don't actually know who the person is, what the device is. There's a philosophical debate you could have about that. But as you move towards consent-based identifiers, that's where I think people are going to be moving.
Okay. And how will this update impact programmatic placements on private publisher sites?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, again, on application targeting, many people are reliant on using device IDs, right? And so on both the targeting side and the attribution side, you're going to see the scope of information diminish. Now, there are still a lot of applications that have consent and they have a device ID and an email address, right? And so, we have an identity graph that we use to correlate devices to each other and to be able to do cross-device retargeting. So, on average, if we see, say, the one individual across 20 applications on average, that number has already reduced, right, by about 30%. So we have 30% less signals, but we still have the ability to see that consent-based opt-in plus a device identifier, across 12 to 15 different applications. So while the number of signals has been reduced, the overall picture actually has not been materially changed. So even today, we're probably about 80% in terms of our ability to see consumers that have opted in to share their device ID, and then also gone through some sort of consent mechanism with an application that has both of those.
No, that's helpful. And you mentioned identity graph. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of that technology and what that means?
Yeah, and that gets into some of the newer identifiers that you'll see, right? So you have Trade Desk has put out their standard Unified ID 2.0. Lotame has Panorama, and so both the supply partners that we're working with, as well as the exchanges, are starting to adopt these new identifiers, in addition to the existing ecosystem, right? So you would look at you've got an anonymized record, right? And then that particular individual household is going to have some things associated with it, like several device IDs, potentially some cookies, potentially some DSP identifiers. And now you have these unified IDs, some of which are based on intent cohorts and some of which are based on personal consent.
Understood. Okay. And how should dispensaries pivot with their digital advertising strategies in this new ecosystem?
Yeah, I would say that at the dispensary level, or even just any mid-sized brand, you shouldn't really need to be worrying about this level of detail, right? You should have a partner, whether it's MediaJel or any of our competitors or whatever other space that you're in, that handles that for you. You really shouldn't be spending your time worrying about what a flock algorithm is or what a consent-based, cookieless ID means. You should be focusing on building your brand and finding, a partner that will handle that for you. Broadly speaking, some things change, like the number of device observations that we can see for doing geospatial retargeting, right? Like conquest targeting, finding device IDs that have been seen in your competitor's location. That sheer volume of device observations is going to shrink because there are more people that are now disallowing some of the apps that would collect that data and sell it. And in some cases, some of those applications had better revenue from selling that opt-in data than they were making from the actual advertising. And so that's actually another part, not a conversation for us or for today, but how does the app developer ecosystem deal with what is going to be a reduction in the value of the asset that they're selling? And that's why Facebook fought this so hard, right? Because as you know, when you're buying impressions for an advertiser, you're willing to spend more for impressions that are targeted towards people that are more likely to be your audience, right? So if you've got an impression to sell and you can attach information about that impression that is attractive to advertisers, it can be worth 10 times more, right? So how does the app community deal with that impact?
They're going to have to spend more money to get the same outcome, right? So
yeah, and you'll see this, I think, what many apps are doing is, finding a way to incentivize their users to consent to share their information, right? And it's a paywall, right? You kind of have this subscription versus advertising based model, but a lot of the advertising value has been a little obscure to the consumer. They didn't really understand how their data was being used. And so I think app developers are just going to have to be more clear about, look, we're providing you a service. If you want it to be free, then you need to help us, run a successful business.
Okay, and this has been data privacy has been a hot topic in Europe. What do you foresee happening kind of in the United States? I know that Europe they're kind of a few years ahead in giving consumers access to their data privacy. Do you see kind of any additional changes being made to what's going on in the United States Do you think anything on a legislative level is going to be implemented?
Yeah, I mean, you've obviously GDPR has been around for a while, and what you said is correct. France and Germany tend to lead the way in terms of number of available impressions that have no sort of identifier on them, which is somewhere maybe around 30% now. In the US, you see about 15% of desktop traffic has has basically cookies blocked, and then about 34% of mobile traffic, which is largely due to the iPhone, right? Because most people are using Safari on the iPhone, and it's blocking those. You have CCPA in California, which is a pretty strong piece of legislation, and you have other states that are trying to introduce similar pieces of legislation, which there's certainly a case to be made for consumer privacy, as advertisers and people and publishers that are offering free services to consumers. It becomes challenging to deal with laws in different states. We know this as just trying to deal with cannabis advertising laws. Aside from privacy, just which ads you can serve. There's over 1,000 different laws in the U.S. today, with all the different states, and it gets pretty complicated.
Yeah, compliance in cannabis is definitely challenging, but we have all the kind of legal help in the team to ensure that everything's compliant on both our companies. So it's been key to launching campaigns in these markets. Will this tracking and privacy update impact Android users in any way?
Well, I mean, it remains to be seen. Google's made some commitments around removing the third-party cookies and moving towards this flock concept. There are people that are equally upset about the concept of using these algorithms of grouping people into cohorts, because they say it has the same general effect of the philosophical concern that people have is that your experience on the internet is going to be shaped by companies or organizations outside of your control, and then you can draw some dots to get to a point of saying that there could be some level of discriminatory effect on that, right? What you get to see and versus what you don't get to see, based on what Google has decided you're interested in, is again, it's a philosophical debate. But Google, it's important to understand the difference between Google and Apple. Google being a data company that sells data, and Apple being a lifestyle company that sells hardware and lifestyle services, right? They have fundamentally very different business models, and so that's why you see them taking different approaches.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's Apple is definitely a luxury company, and Google is scaled their algorithm, their search, their platform, their product by providing the best experience to consumers, the best results, the best most relevant ads. So yeah, you hit it right on the head there. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Jake, about this topic that some of our viewers should know?
Well, the one thing I'll say is this discussion that we're having now is probably going to go out of date very quickly. Things change so quickly right now, and again, if you're a marketer and an advertiser, find people to work with that will handle this for you. I would say it's the same thing as getting a good attorney to handle your business affairs. It's not something that you really should be dealing with. What you should have is a good partner that you like working with that can handle this stuff for you, because we've got a bunch of people spending all day long on this in our engineering and integration side, so that our partners don't have to.
Wonderful. Well, Jake, once again, thank you for joining today's LinkedIn lunch break. Do you want to tell our viewers where they can find you on LinkedIn? Like, what's your handles? What's your profile URLs and all that?
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm just LinkedIn, I think J Litke, or you can just search for my name. MediaJel, we have a page as well, and we're actually going to be launching a new website here in the next few weeks. We have we're a little outdated. We've been a little busy running campaigns, so MediaJel.com. That's MediaJel with a J. We're easy to find on across Twitter, Instagram. It's all going to be at MediaJel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. And, we'll be covering on the foot traffic side, we'll be launching a webinar next week on June 3rd about, how the Apple iOS update will impact your cannabis ads in cross-channel tracking. So, we're looking at different ways to safeguard your digital marketing strategy with our tips and insights. So be sure to join us next week for that webinar to continue this discussion. And, once again, thank you for joining us. And Jake, thank you for taking the time today to talk more about these changes happening with Apple.
Yeah, always happy to get into the details on this stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Take care. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Cheers.